Welcome. Thank you all for coming. What is wrong with AI? And what is wrong with the way we talk about what is wrong with AI? That's what I want to discuss with all of you today. My name is Jacob Blumenfeld. I am a postdoctoral research fellow in philosophy at the Center for Social Critique at Humboldt-University. And welcome to today's roundtable on the critique of AI. There's this joke about AI. I think Kate Crawford made it. It's neither artificial nor intelligent. Artificial intelligence is made out of real material resources, and it's real people behind the tasks that make it look autonomous. What do I mean by AI? I mean the research, design, and use of machine learning-based programs which run on large data sets that are used for solving optimization problems by taking advantage of statistical probability and predicting the most likely solution given the data on which it's trained. These tools try to automate decision-making given a specific objective. All the human labor and material nature that goes into these processes is rendered invisible. But I don't just want to focus on the technicalities of AI, though we'll discuss that too, but also on the ideology of AI, or even AI as a kind of ideology. How does AI function as an ideology of progress, automation, freedom, and control? Now, for social theorists, one key question is how to know exactly what we are criticizing about AI in the first place. Is it the thing itself or its effect on society? Is it the use of AI or the way it's made? Is it the technical system or the social relations in which it's embedded that make it harmful or beneficial to society? To find out how to criticize AI and how not to, I invited 4 experts on this topic. Allow me to introduce them now. On my left is Matteo Pasquinelli. He is the Associate Professor in Philosophy of Science at the Department of Philosophy and Cultural Heritage at Foscari University in Venice, where he's coordinating the ERC project AI Models. His book, The Eye of the Master, A Social History of Artificial Intelligence, won the Deutscher Memorial Prize. And you should look out for a new article of his at the end of this year called Theories of Automation, From Adam Smith to Artificial Intelligence. Next to Matteo is Anna-Verena Nosthoff. She's a junior professor of ethics of digitalization at the Karl von Ossietzky University of Oldenburg and co-director of the Critical Data Lab at Humboldt-University and University of Oldenburg. She's the author of Cybernetik und Kritik, eine Theorie digitaler Regierungskunst, out with Surkamp today, I think. Yeah, congratulations.
Thank you.
And I just want to point out one article she wrote that I really liked. She wrote it with Felix Maschewski for Thesis 11 on the obsolescence of politics, rereading Gunther Ander's critique of cybernetic governance and integral power in the digital age. Next to Anna-Verena is Roland Meyer. He's been the DADH Bridge Professor for Digital Cultures and Arts at the University of Zurich and the Zurich University of the Arts since July 2024. Roland's work as a media and visual culture researcher focuses on networked image cultures. He is the author of Gesichtserkennung from 2021 and Operativporträts, ein Bildgeschichte der Identifizierbarkeit vom Lavatur bis Facebook from 2019. And I want to point out one article that he wrote for the FAZ last year called Die Ästhetik der digitale Faschismus. It was very helpful. Next to Roland is Rainer Mühlhoff. He's a professor of ethics of artificial intelligence at the Institute of Cognitive Science and the Institute of Philosophy at the University of Osnabrück. He is affiliated as a researcher with the Einstein Center, Digital Futures in Berlin, and an associate member of the Collaborative Research Center, Affective Societies at the Free University of Berlin. He is the author of Künstliche Intelligenz und der neue Faschismus from Reclam last year, and also The Ethics of AI from Bristol University Press. Now, AI tools are everywhere today. They're in our phones, our computers, our universities, our workplaces. They're in our energy systems, our financial system, our justice system. Students, teachers, managers, doctors, translators use it. It'd be wrong to deny that people don't use it. People use it to find companions, right? To ask for advice, to come up with recipes, play games, to make images, movies, and memes. People use it to harass, to abuse and exploit marginalized communities. They use it to write, to grade, to code, to annoy, to play, and the demand is only growing. AI requires massive amounts of data, energy, water, hardware, and cheap labor. The owners of AI companies are not only in bed with each other, boosting each other's stocks, but also in bed with the far right. AI should be criticized. It is being criticized. But how? Right? How should we criticize it? I want to briefly distinguish between a couple various critiques of AI before we get to our speakers. You can make a philosophical critique of AI. Say, artificial intelligence is not really intelligent, right? Human consciousness can never be computable. There are some things that computers cannot do, right? That's why we should dismiss it. That's one strand. There can be a political critique of AI in terms of the political power of Silicon Valley, of the AI companies as unaccountable monopolies, right? Undemocratic and pushing undemocratic and authoritarian politics through their technologies. You can make an ecological critique of AI, the kinds of extraction of resources that are necessary to power these data centers. Every prompt you send demands a little bit more water, a little bit more coal and natural gas that's going to blow the carbon budget. You can make an economic critique of AI, right? Deskilling workers, exploiting labor, exploiting hidden labor across the world, right? To drive those automated cars that we think are AI. You can make a legal critique of AI, right? Violating copyrights, stealing our data, stealing the creative work of hundreds of cultural producers, right? You can have a cultural critique of AI. AI is flattening and leveling the creativity of cultural production, making it resemble a prose of, I don't even know, just, what is it? Just cliche management speak, right? It's not this, it's this, right? I'm interested in the critical theory approach of AI, right? What is the social form that makes AI possible? What is the society that makes AI the way it is? How are we already primed to use AI for these tasks? What kind of pressures are we under to adopt it? Are all of us under? It's very easy to criticize users of AI, but it might be more interesting to criticize the producers of it. So let's start. I have a question for all of you. It's going to be the same question, and then we'll spice it up a bit. The first question for you all, and we're just going to go down the list here, is how should we and how should we not criticize AI? That's it.
Who's going first?
Yeah, you want to go?
Me? Okay.
Yeah.
I had a question for you, Jakob, because in the sense that you made an overview of theories, and I think probably we are at the point of time when we need a kind of organic theory of AI or an organic theory of automation of technological development. So we are coming, emerging from illustrious traditions, but probably it's time that we try to find a way to connect all of these disciplines also. And just because you mentioned this article that is coming out in a new version for historical materialism, I think there is this, not to mention some local know-how again, part 4 of Capital by Marx is this part in which he tries to produce, to build, to write himself a kind of organic theory, right? In which he says machines are produced where there are actually resistance to exploitation, where strikes are higher, and then you have this, innovation coming up, as a form of replacing jobs where strikes are high. But then he says, of course, these machines are built according to the logic of the division of labor. And then he defined also this idea that machines are these systems for the augmentation of relative surplus value. But just to mention that he tried himself, Marx, to have a vision in which he put like a sort of antagonistic standpoint theory of automation a labor process theory of automation and a value form theory of automation, if you want, right? And I think we are at the point where also today we should try to put these levels together, even if I think we forgot, some kind of theories of automation we had already for instance, in the 19th century. And also they were discussing, by the way, how to indeed, what is the role of knowledge in the labor process. This was my answer to your initial remark.
Okay.
I can continue or I can pass the...
So thanks first of all for introducing us all to sort of the various dimension of let's say the various ways in which we, I think, need to problematize existing AI system. I would definitely agree that we have to look at sort of the various social dimensions as well that you mentioned, including the way that AI systems are essentially based on the exploitation of labor, and the way that they are based on the exploitation of natural resources and so on and so forth. Maybe just to add to that, because I essentially agree with everything that you said in the beginning. What I look at, and this is probably also the time to pitch my book a little bit, what I might be able to offer to the discourse is maybe two forms of critique. The first one is an essentially Foucauldian view on the forms of power that are currently being exerted and that are very much imminent to AI systems. And I think, given that sort of, you also mentioned that the ubiquitousness of AI systems, the normalcy with regard to how we use them as well, how they are sort of like really colonizing our everyday lives as well. As subjects, I think it's still very essential to ask the very Foucauldian way of how we are being governed as subjects as well with regard to these environments. And maybe also expand that a little bit and not just, speak of forms of governmentality, but of forms of environmentality as well, thinking of the increasingly immersive dimension of digital environment systems and so on. And then I would say, and that maybe also responds a bit to the question that you also asked, namely the question of how not to critique AI. I think, if you look at the current discourse surrounding AI, there's plenty of people that exemplify how we should not critique AI, thinking of the very dominant superintelligence discourse as well, that is being propagated by people such as Nick Bostrom, for instance, who, was very, very influential in coining the term and essentially in as I said before, in propagating the term of superintelligence that is now being reproduced. The whole superintelligence discourse is being reproduced by people such as Eric Schmidt, for instance. And there's this TESCREAL acronym, as it has been suggested by Timnit Gebru and Emil Torres, for instance, to point to these new and maybe not so new ideologies that play a huge role in the current discourse surrounding AGI, ranging from transhumanism to rationalism to singularitarianism to effective altruism to long-termism and so on. And I would say that, next to this focus on a potentially new form of governmentality critique that is inspired by Foucault, I think we also need to think of maybe a new form of ideology critique that pays attention to the development of these new ideologies that, probably can also be reduced to very conventional forms of tech ideologies, including techno-solutionism and techno-determinism. But the thing is, these ideologies are very, very influential when it comes to shaping how existing AI regulations deprioritize existing harms that are part of AI systems. And they also shape, for instance, the current nationalist agenda of the United States, the AI accelerationist agenda they have, that I think also, again, from Foucauldian perspective, it's very interesting as well to investigate as well how these TESCREAL ideologies shape the discourses as well surrounding AI systems and how they sort of really enter into existing AI regulations. Thinking of the AI safety discourse, for instance, that has been really, really prominent as well, that is very closely connected to the TESCREAL ideologies. So these are two dimensions that I would highlight.
Can you just define TESCREAL real quick, or?
That's that's an acronym, a bundle of ideologies, really. As I said before, that the term goes back to a paper that was written by Timnit Gebru and Emil Torres, where the essential hypothesis is that they say there's, particular ideologies that are connected to the AGI discourse. And TESCRE stands for transhumanism, rationalism, transhumanism, extropianism, singularitarianism, cosmism, rationalism, effective altruism, and long-termism. So these are all these ideologies that, as they claim, they intersect. Yeah. They also build up on each other, I would say. Transhumanism is the first ideology that sort of like has influenced many of the ideologies that emerged in the aftermath. Yeah, so the essential hypothesis is that there's like new ideologies that influence the way that we talk about AI as well, existing AI systems.
Okay, so we already have a Marxist critique of AI, a Foucauldian critique of AI. Roland, you're next.
I could subscribe to both critiques and just add some perspective from my point of view. And I think critique of ideology is essential, and it's not just, and as you already hinted at, not just the ideology that is used to enforce these technologies and to scale them, but really the ideology within these systems. And I think one particularly important ideology is the ideology of scaling itself. So there is, in the 2010s, like a path that was taken in the development of AI models, especially by OpenAI, which was saying, okay, we need more and more data, we need more and more compute, and then some features will emerge that we cannot foresee, and that is our way to AGI. We don't have to curate the data sets, we don't have to steer the direction, we just have to have more raw compute and more data. And that's what has been done since then, and that has some, well, one can say impressive results, but the result is that we have a technology that is not a tool. And I think that is very important to stress also. Every critique that says, okay, it's a tool and it's used in the wrong way, I think is misguided, because these so-called foundation models, which are trained on, as we all know, vast amounts of data scraped from the web, stolen from the web, as one can say, they are not built for specific purposes, but they are built for no purpose at all, and then afterwards aligned to specific purposes. So that's what they do, and that, I think, in itself is a problem, and there is an inherent violence and brutality in that logic of scaling. And I would just stress 2 points of violence that I see, and as kind of striving for dominance also that is built in this process of scaling. And the one is towards, and you already hinted at that, creative labor, which is appropriate on a massive scale. And it's not just stolen, it's devalued. So there is a quote from some meta lawyers that I always found extremely impressive. When they were sued for copyright violation, they said to the authors of these books that were used as training data, yeah, your books as training data have no economic value, because we stole billions of books, and every single book just kind of influences the model in such a tiny way. It's statistically irrelevant. So if we leave out your book, never mind. So that's a devaluation of cultural production that is not theft, because if you steal something, you steal the value, right? But here you say, no, it's not valuable at all, but we steal it anyway. And I think that is a brutality that is now being performed very openly by these people like Sam Altman. And the other aspect, and we can talk about that more, I guess, is that whole scaling up of data centers, which we know is not only producing a massive carbon footprint, but really affecting like the local population in the areas these data centers are built. And I think the most horrifying example is the Colossus data centers in Memphis, which is built in a region that is primarily inhabited by Black people, people of color, and it is fueled, or it has been fueled at least, by gas turbines, which polluted the air, and people actually couldn't breathe because of a data center that is used to train grok. the same AI model that is now used for deepfake porn on X. So that is a kind of very open and brutal violence that is can now be seen as an effect of this logic of scaling, which I would say is an ideology that is both a political ideology and economic ideology, and it is part of a certain trajectory of the development of the technology.
Just one follow-up question real quick. You said AI is not a tool and that it's not theft. Did you have an alternative in terms of AI not being a tool, then it is something else? Or it's not theft, then it's...
I would say it's a medium, but then we have can get in a media theoretical discussion. And I think it is, as I said, its main kind of effective devaluation rather than theft, I would say.
Thank you. Rainer?
Yeah, hi, also from my side. You are asking which forms of critique we should engage in and which ones we shouldn't. That's an interesting question that prompts me asking what is the normative principle by which you want to judge on that? And you already presented an impressive list of critique approaches, let's say, or layers of critique. When I entered this holy building on the stairs, I stumbled upon the Marx quotation in golden letters saying that the philosophers have only differently interpreted the world, and what really matters is that we change it. If different forms of critique are also different interpretations of the world, if you allow me this stretch, then I would say, yeah, what matters might be how can we change the world? How can we, what forms of critique will unleash into transformation in the right direction? And what is the right direction, of course? And I would say that this totally depends on who you are talking to and which arena you are debating in. For instance, when you are in politics and you want to fight for regulation of AI, it of course matters that you point out the vast environmental damages, the exploitation, the growing power imbalances of these companies, and so on. I'm not sure this has maximum impact in a debate among users, for instance, of AI, because users tend to foreground that it is comfy for them using it, or that it makes only a marginal environmental impacts when they prompt one time more ChatGPT. So that might be a different arena. And for instance, what in your list has been missing for me, but that has also already been brought up, but I'm also more on the track of ideology critique, because you cannot think of such a technology as AI without the millions of all of us users enabling the technology by daily producing data and also making the data available through our services and the services we choose on our devices to few companies that then use and extricate the data to make AI with it. And which is also an industry that then, or the vast amount of data and the things they want to do with the data then requires the worldwide extraction of resources, forms of labor, energy, and so on. Yeah. So, but still, it is AI. There is no AI without all of us as users, and this is why, for me, a Foucauldian perspective is very relevant in the critique of AI, because you need to understand. How is subjectivity of people or of different people in different ways, but still subjectivity of different people shaped by the AI constellation in such a way that it is acceptable, wishable, whatever, desirable that we use AI. And I would say if you want to do such a Foucauldian critique, you cannot go without understanding AI as a phenomenon of ideologies in our societies. And these are not only the ideologies listed by the TESCREAL acronym, which are more the ideologies of people within the AI scene, of researchers, business people in the AI scene. What I find interesting, and this is what I have tried to also lay out in this book, is that I see the ideological constellation of AI as some kind of a layered thing. Like it's like an onion. The outer layers are the public discourse, and the more shallow versions of these ideologies of AI in our discourse, such as AI can solve the impasse of school teachers or of people in elderly care, or like the techno-solutionism ideas that are circling in politics, but also these doomsday narratives. Yeah, AI will outpace human intelligence in a couple of years, and what are we doing then? And will China be first? And the EU has missed the train, and we need to deregulate AI so that we can have more digital sovereignty. This is all the ideological complex in the public layer, and below that is a layer that has more like clandestine ideologies among people in the AI scene, where you are then in transhumanism, a revival of eugenics, and Anna already mentioned them all. And I would say, as the nucleus of this onion, over the last 10 years, these ideologies have even been radicalizing in the form that they now form explicit political projects. Yeah, explicitly political projects. Yeah, so with the alliance between big tech and the alt-right or the new right movements in Europe, these ideologies start really articulating political visions and putting them in action. So I see this kind of layered building, and it's so important that for like to kind of map across the layers, yeah, which of the ideas circulating between Peter Thiel, J.D. Vance, and the alt-right, where does this correspond with theorems that are more in transhumanism or eugenics or some things Oxford philosophers would engage in, and so on. And then you can from there link these ideologies to the tropes in the public discourse and understand, okay, what is the connection between things we have in public discourse to these, and so on. That's, for instance, an approach I find important to communicate in a public debate in such a way that we question our forms of subjectivation, yeah, the forms of how we are pressed into kind of complicity, yeah, how are we made complicits in this ideological discourse as users?
And even calling it AI is already part of the ideology in a sense, but it seems inescapable. I mean, I'm wondering, Matteo, how you would respond to this ideology critique, because I think your critique is a bit different, right? You're not really going on ideology critique. You're doing a division of labor critique.
Indeed, I was attempted to say 100% disagree, as in the kind of
disagree.
It's kind of urban kind of tube interview that you see on social media. No, I've been, reading Foucault and teaching Foucault a lot, but I think I take this as a form of self-criticism, so it's not a critic of somebody else. So I think it's part of a sort of self-criticism I went through myself, also emerging from media studies. I think today what we don't need and what we shouldn't do in terms of applying a methodology is like to study the impact of AI, the impact of technology, the impact of infrastructure. I think that we inherited a sort of power discourse or an analytics of power that somehow is not able to show the real dynamics. I think what we need is a scientific theory of technological development that show how technology takes one form rather than the other. There is a logic behind, and I think this logic can be mapped. And when we have a genetic model, when we can describe the development of technology genetically, we can also, I think, develop a kind of political discourse around it, or a political response. So I think the studies of the impact are not enough. And there is some limitation also in the Foucauldian techniques of the self kind of approach. I don't want to sound too old school, but I think, as I said, I continue a form of self-criticism. I notice myself how I've been applying, probably a typical trope of Western thinking, going to the analytics of this mechanism, going to the analytics of the division of labor. So having this focus on the analysis at the atomic level more than on the political synthesis. And then sometimes, we travel to China, we encounter other formal analysis, we compare our study with what, for instance, Chinese scholars do, and we realize that our framework, our brain frame and methodology is not easy to translate into other cultural coordinates. And I think what we miss when we start from this sort of analytics of power is like this important bond that I think, erased sometimes in critical theory in between the individual, the community, the society, and the political institution. And we miss that. I think we don't have, even in this case, an organic understanding of what would be a political bond. And from this comes, indeed, I think, a sort of sometimes bias in the way we approach technology and our perspective. I will say something else maybe in a few seconds about this more when I reconnect more passages.
Any of you want to respond to that, or?
Maybe just shortly, maybe, and that's also something that I'm trying to outline a little bit in my book. I think maybe a path that we could envision as well is to pluralize critiques. Why limit ourselves to one critique, given the I think various forms of power and the different forms of power that AI systems reproduce. And and I don't mean this solely in a Foucauldian way of thinking about power, but maybe we could sort of like combine a Foucauldian take with a more Marxist critique to be able to also, on critical grounds, respond to the various forms of power that are associated with AI systems. Maybe just maybe also as a rather open question.
I mean, Rainer asked this question about, what are the ends of critique? Like different critiques for different ends. But my question is, are there some ends we should not pursue? Are there some that are false paths, or false things we shouldn't go down, and to focus on where the core of the question is? For instance, with ideology critique, let's say that the managers of these AI companies in 10 years change their minds and they become like progressive liberals and they're all good people. Then what is it like? Does that change the critique? I mean, do we still have an ideology critique if their ideology is now on the right side?
Well, yeah, I mean,
But that would, yeah.
Sorry, Roland.
No, maybe I can react to that, because as I wanted to point out, kind of very graphically, there is a certain ideology already built in the development. And as Matteo said, that development has taken a certain path, and there is a genealogy that can be written, how that idea of AI, and there have been different ideas of AI, there is a continuity and there are shifts in that history, and it's complex, how that has shaped our last 10 years. And then we can ask, okay, what is it building on? What happened in the 10 years before? And then we see, okay, it's the rise of platform capitalism, and it's a production of vast amounts of data, user-driven datafication, people being subjectified as users of platforms. And now these AI systems are building on that. And that specific logic of foundation models, of building ever greater models with basically data scraped from the web, data produced by what we would call all of us, whoever that is. That is like a next level in the economic logic of these platform companies. So now they can use not only the surveillance data about users, but also all the content, and use that for pattern recognition, and use it for producing more content and so on, and use it to train their models. And the ideology kind of springs from that business model. It's not that what people like Musk think or not think. And I'm a bit hesitant about how important all these kind of fringe ideologies are. I think it's important to study them, but to see what they are the expression of. And maybe then I'm a very classic Marxist. I think they are expression of modes and conditions of production. And production in that sense has been mainly distribution, because platform companies are mainly companies that organize distribution rather than production. But now they also produce the content they distribute via these AI models. And that is a new step. And everything else is kind of part of that dynamic, in my view. But that's a bit reductive, I would say. But I think we can learn something from tracing that genealogy that goes back to the beginnings, both of platform companies in the 2000s and the whole discourse of big data, which is happening at the same time, and says, okay, we don't need causality, we just need correlation. We can dive into these big seas of data. We don't need any science anymore. That was already like the AI discourse now in its kind of first version, but they didn't have like the power to really and force it in the same way. And now they have these models which make it more plausible that big data is the solution to everything.
I think it's really important that the ideology of AI is not only what Peter Thiel and Mark Zuckerberg and the likes are thinking and saying. And if they change their minds or present themselves differently, that does not make any difference. But the ideology of AI is much bigger. It's like it's a huge constellation of ideas, tropies, beliefs, discourses, but also practices, problems, material, impasses, and so on, where all of us are part. You can also add colonial legacies of global power imbalances, certain developments in how labor and production are organized, and so on. And for instance, you can see the ideology of AI when you observe how stunningly obvious it is to many politicians in Germany that we should invest millions in AI technology for high schools to automate grading. There is ideology at work, because how could this get so obvious to so many overnight in a way? Yeah, this is far away from Peter Thiel or whoever, and we should not personalize the problem of AI ideology on certain like Silicon Valley bosses, and neither should we Americanize the problem. Yeah, that we are kind of doing this othering. It's all happening there in Silicon Valley, and the next fascism will happen over there, and how we can watch from here with a popcorn emoji. But we are in this as well. We have that here as well. We are playing part in this ideological complex. Maybe we are not the epicenter of this. I'm not sure. Let's see. But this is so important that this is not only like what the tech bosses say is only a crystallization of processes that are bigger than they are. Because, for instance, Peter Thiel was saying what he's saying already 20 years ago, even writing it down, yeah. But nobody paid attention. And now we are focusing on Peter Thiel. Maybe in 5 years we are focusing on somebody else, on things they were saying 20 years ago. So this is, you cannot pin it on certain persons. That's the important thing.
Matteo?
As I want to point to the fact that at the beginning, in your brilliant overview, you didn't describe at which point we are of this technological curve. If you are at the beginning, or if you are at the end, if you are, at the beginning of an economic growth of prosperity, or at the end, maybe close to the bubble that will burst. And I think this is also a question. So it was an open question for me. I don't know where we are exactly, but I have the feeling there is a sort of this aggressiveness of the AI ideology, their transhumanism, their accelerationism, the way they are also try to militarize the discourse, the ideology of AI, I think is also a symptom of the fact that some of these monopolies of the Silicon Valley perceive that they are at the end, at the point of saturation of the sphere of distribution and circulation. I interpret it like that. I interpret this political aggressiveness as a sort of weakness of the project they had. And here we should discuss indeed what is the view that we have of the geopolitics of AI, the relation that we have in the United States between private companies and the state, and compared to what is the other big opponent and competitor, that is basically China, de facto state monopoly on the data of the population, a kind of opponent and that is quite difficult to emulate. So I think we have also to maybe bring the discussion at this geopolitical level in which we have a different role or a non-role for Europe in between this different attempt to regulate. And this is also my contribution to the ideological critique, because I follow, the debate that are emerging closely. And it's very fascinating, for instance, the way Peter Thiel has been, reviving the idea of misinterpreting the ring of the catechon, but mentioning Carl Schmitt, mobilizing even Carl Schmitt in the new political agenda, and using a quite a sophisticated language to show how for instance, for them, for this AI monopolies, the new form of the Antichrist in their language is basically social democracy, China, the environmental movement, Greta Thunberg, because they are all, for them, obstacles to this project of a basically privately run state power. And so I think these are like interesting aspect of some part of the ideological production connected to AI, but also, in my view, maybe a symptom of the weakness of the West Front in the making of this new technology. To which maybe we should go to the point we discussed earlier, that is what would be a project of socialization or resocialization of knowledge, of intelligence.
We'll get
later.
We'll get there in a second. You did mention that we need a scientific theory of technological development. I just want to ask a little bit more about the technical side of AI. Do we need to know the tech inside and out to have a real proper kind of theory of AI, to have a real proper critique of it? Do we need to know the history of the technological development to know what it exactly is that is reproducing these structures of exploitation, surveillance, domination? Or can we criticize it without that insider knowledge? Any thoughts?
I mean, I think we need strongly an understanding of the technical function of the mechanism. One of the problems in teaching AI or doing AI studies, critique of AI, is the fact that we are not very familiar with the statistical technique that are at the core of AI models, rendering, cultural heritage, language, our image production. There are technique of multidimensional analysis that would be, and vectorization that would be relatively easy to teach in university classes, right? But we don't do that. And I think this is also, part of the work I tried to do in the past is position AI in the development of techniques that are basically cultural technique absorbed by mathematics, statistics, even physics in between the 19th century and 20th century. And the interesting for us, for any study of science and technology, how these techniques got automated at a certain point with psychometrics, with artificial neural net in the 50s. And today they are this fantastic tool to render collective knowledge and collective intelligence. But I think, yes, we need to understand how they work.
I would certainly agree with that. And that's also why I did my own book, is because I look back at the history of cybernetics to better understand as well, and again, in a Foucauldian view of how we are being governed in the present. And there's few reductionisms that, you can actually trace back to the origins of cybernetics, including the way that, cyberneticists have thought about the relationship between man and machine, between the mind and the computer, for instance, how they thought about politics in a very systemic manner. And the political, as a network to be governed by information flows, essentially. Those are, I think, ideas that still matter when we understand the digital present. But then generally, I would say the question is also, of course, do we need to have a very specific understanding of different AI systems? Do we need to know the difference between generative AI and machine learning? And then I would say, well, I'm not so sure, because sometimes I think the difference is not so huge as it might first appear. And then you can as well, and again, I would say, relating that back to cybernetics, for instance, many of these technologies are based on very similar mechanisms, on a very similar logic, including, predictive analytics, the way that these systems use past data to predict the future or some form of the future, the way that they sometimes even determine the future. And also the way that they, reduce the subject to data subjects, for instance. And there I would say there's also similarities that are being shared by many of these current forms of AI, where I would say, the differences are very superficial in a way, and it sometimes suffices to look at the broader logics that these systems are being based on.
Yeah. I think the level of detail of technological knowledge you need is based on what questions you're asking and what kind of critique you want to raise. But for example, if you want to know, which interests me, how AI image generation models represent history or historical images, how they distort history, for example, you have to think about something like vectorization, for example, and you have to get at least a grasp of what that is, what latent spaces are, whether they still play a role in your AI image generation models or not, which is a very complex discussion I had with computer scientists. So you have to get some knowledge, not a really technical knowledge in my case at least, but a knowledge about the preconditions, also the epistemological preconditions. What is it based on? What does it presuppose? And what are the possible implications? And that's about the algorithms or the kind of machine learning logics that are in place, but also about things like data sets, for example. So what kind of data is used? How is it structured? Or especially it's not very structured. So what does it mean that it's not very structured? So I think these kind of questions are necessary if you want to have a kind of more specific critique. And the more specific your critique becomes, the more detail you have to have in terms of technological knowledge. But as a media cultural scholar, I'm always very limited in my view, and I have to check with people who know better that I don't do the most blatant mistakes when I describe something.
I'm working a lot with high school teachers in teacher training formats and stuff, and what I observe is that AI has for long been allocated as a subject for the computer science classes, and not, for instance, for social science or philosophy subjects at school, which I find totally wrong. And a related observation is that in the public discourse, as soon as we call for more technical understanding about AI, like the usual narrative is that we need to understand AI in order to criticize it. And understanding AI is then a purely technical thing. Yeah, with this idea that I need to understand AI is suddenly turned from a socio-technical constellation where there's power, people exploited, data misused, or misused, and societal impact manifested. Suddenly it is turned into a question of how does backpropagation work? What is a convolutional neural network versus a support vector machine? And the thing is, I do not need to understand the difference between a diesel engine and a normal petrol combustion engine to make the critique that this is that driving these cars to the extent we are doing it is damaging our environment. And as little as I need to know the physics of combustion engines, I need to know the algorithms of AI. And I would say it actually obfuscates the critical view or viewpoint if you get too much on this tech inside talk level of understanding AI, because that has its very elegant mechanisms of completely blinding away and obfuscating the societal embedding of the technology. Yeah, that you are then talking about abstract mathematical or computer science terminology and problems and so on that are hard to understand. I'm a mathematician by training. And you completely blind away how this actually works as a business model, how much intelligence gets into how to hook the users to produce the data, how much intelligence goes into how to influence regulation, how to find regulatory loopholes, how to do that data-intensive business model despite data protection regulation by exploiting certain gaps in it, how to foster a big international scheme of corporate collaborations that enables you to exploit the resources, the labor forces in the global south, the flows of material resources and so on. That all gets away when in the common way the question of let's understand AI is being framed. And this is a big problem because that demobilizes critique of AI and kind of makes or constitutes a monopoly on AI for the tech bros, for the people who understand or putatively understand the technology, instead of all of us having a say. And that's why I think it should be an integral part of understanding and critiquing AI that we find suitable vocabularies describing the functioning of AI, which are not purely technical vocabularies, but socio-technical vocabularies, political vocabularies with such terms as power or strategies or profit interests, or maybe how do you psychologically envision the average user so that the user can easily be hooked by a certain user experience design or interaction design. All this is part of AI.
I'd like to go a bit deeper into kind of each of your specialties in your own work. Further on this critique of AI question, I'll just start with Roland. In your work, you tend to make a relation between the aesthetic production of AI images and a kind of fascist aesthetic. That's a very difficult argument to make, that there's like in the form of the image itself, there's a political content. So I'm just wondering, how do you make this argument?
Well, I'm not the only one making this argument. It has been made by others, and it's exemplified like every day on x.com and truth.social and whatever, also Instagram. I think there are different elements to that. I think the one that I already mentioned, the question of devaluation of creative labor and the brutality that is part of that, the very open brutality that is now being visible, for example, on a platform like x.com, where you can ask Grok to nudify any image of a woman and of children also, and this kind of promise of power over other people's images and likenesses and bodies, ultimately, that comes with this technology. So it is a technology that is already a kind of metaphor for power and domination, and also, now I would say, maybe even a tool, or made into a tool to exert power. But I think there is also another dimension, which I stressed in different essays, and this comes for me down to like three things. The one is that there is a kind of nostalgic dimension to AI images, insofar that they are not only trained on vast amount of images from the past, because training data is always data from the past, but they also manifest a certain model of history, one could say, and that is that all the past is a resource for visual patterns, for styles, for aesthetics, for vibes that are completely dehistoricized, that can now be recombined into these kind of timeless fantasy worlds, and that you see all the time. So you have ideas of a certain historical epoch, but it's just what Jameson called pastness. It's an aesthetic idea of a past that never was. And you can see that every day, for example, on the Instagram account of the Department of Labor. So if you haven't seen that, check it out. It's horrible. And so there is this certain view of the past as a resource to be extracted and that can be recombined to this nostalgic dream worlds. There is a question of a certain genericness that comes with an affirmation of bias, of stereotypes, of cliches, of sexist stereotypes, of racist stereotypes. And I think that is very much also built into the technology insofar, and it's a very, oversimplification, but basically AI image generation is kind of pattern recognition in reverse. And it's based upon techniques of pattern recognition and image recognition that were kind of, reverse engineered. So instead of just labeling images, like we have hundreds of labels of images of animals, and you label all the cats, now you prompt a label and it produces the image that best matches your label. And what is the image that best matches your label? It's a stereotype. It's a thing that's most cliche, like that everybody expects when you prompt a cat. And with a cat, that may not be a problem, but with a family, of course, it's a problem. With a woman, it's a problem. With a man, it's a problem. So you get these simplified, extremely legible stereotypes in the very logic of prompting and the very logic of matching labels with dominant patterns extracted from vast amounts of visual data. And from a right-wing perspective, that's a pro. That's something they want. That is something they affirm. And you can see also that, especially in questions of gender representations, how much they affirm it. And the long-standing critique of bias is then turned around and now kind of the bias is actually what they want, and what they call bias is a liberal bias, so that is everything that is aiming at regulating these technologies or trying to mitigate the bias that is built in there. And it's now also a policy of Trump, who is has an executive order against woke AI that is a direct reaction to Google's Gemini image generator, which produced images that were not expected, like images of Asian female popes, via something they call shadow prompting. So they didn't change the stereotyping and cliche logic of the model, but they changed the interface so that when you prompted Pope, it would say, okay, you want an Asian female Pope, so here you have it, and that's more diverse. And the reaction to that is to say, no, we don't want any woke AI, we want the kind of true thing, and the true thing is that which already always produces stereotypes. And the last thing, maybe cut it short, these images are optimized to trigger reactions on social media. And it's not only that the training data they are trained on is like the vast amounts of images that are already aggregated by platform companies, but it's also that the reactions of platform users, the social media users, are used to fine-tune these models to make them aesthetically pleasing in a very certain way, to align them to certain aesthetics expectations that are the expectations of platform users, and especially, and one can trace it and has been traced, a certain group of platform users that predominantly kind of reflect their aesthetic and ideological tastes in these images and their aesthetics, and that is mostly white middle-class men from North America, actually. So there is like very different dimension where these images are already optimized for certain, I would say, reactionary, authoritarian, and even fascist tendencies. And it's not a misuse of these technologies when people like Trump and Musk and whoever are using them as this kind of slot machines, because that's in a way what they were built for.
That's their function.
If the function of a system is what the system does, it is their function, and you can trace how it came to be to function that way.
Anna, I just want to ask you a question on cybernetics. Is there a meaningful distinction between understanding cybernetic governance and AI, and kind of a critique of AI, or do you subsume AI into kind of a cybernetic governmentality?
I wouldn't subsume it, I think, directly, but I would say there's a few linkages between cybernetic governance and cybernetic governmentality and digital governmentality. There's this media theoretical premise that has been shared by many media theorists for a few years now already, such as Erich Hörl, Klaus Piers, Dieter Mersch, and others, who trace the origins of current digital governmentalities back to the origins of cybernetics. And I would certainly agree with them, because if you look at the origins of cybernetics, then there's a few motifs, dispositives, narratives, also reductionisms that occur throughout the 40s, 50s onwards, that still play a role, I think, with regard to the question of how we are being governed in digital societies. What you get there, for instance, and that has been very influential for the development of AI. For instance, the brain model by McCulloch and Pitts, who came up with the first idea of a neural network, in a sense, the McCulloch-Pitts neuron, that was essential work really for the history and for the development of artificial intelligence. And from that also, you get the analogy between the brain and the computer. That's, of course, still very influential for the way that, ideologically we speak and think about AI currently. Then, as a second motif, maybe, there's a way of paralleling the human and the machine, maybe even drawing sort of like analogies maybe to the point where cyberneticians have defended an identity between the man and the machine. You get a very post-political mindset that I think still plays a huge role for understanding, for instance, how Elon Musk, for instance, portrays his work with regard to the Department of Government Efficiency, which is, of course, embedded in a deeply political agenda, but the way that he portrays the Department of Government efficiency as being more effective, more efficient through an agenda of acceleration than conventional processes of politics, and the idea of designing a system that might be able to offer an alternative, to a very sort of like conflict-based conception of the political. That's, I think, also part of the cybernetic mindset, especially the political cybernetics that have developed throughout the 60s and 70s by people such as Carl Deutsch and David Easton. So there's a few, I think, linkages that you can draw on that play a huge role, I would say, for understanding digital forms of governance, but also the way that we conceive of technology. That's also a very, very important narrative throughout the history of cybernetics, is to portray technology as something that's essentially neutral, right? In one sense, but at the same time, they also defend, of course, the hypothesis that technology can no longer be understood in terms of a means and relation, which is a bit paradoxical, because they sort of like come up with both of these hypotheses, which are, however, inherently contradictory. And I guess in a way, it's kind of the same contradiction that you also see with people, in the that are sort of like at the center of the AGI race. Think of Sam Altman, for instance, who says essentially the same thing. On Monday he says technology is only a tool, and on Tuesday he's like, well, it's we have created a godlike entity. And there's a few contradictions, I think, that also have been very consistent since the beginning of cybernetics.
That reminds me of a tweet that Sam Altman made last week, which I had to screenshot. He said, "I'm very excited about AI, but to go off script for a minute, I built an app with Codex last week. It was very fun. Then I started asking it for ideas for new features, and at least a couple of them were better than I was thinking of. I felt a little useless, and it was sad." And that's the end of the tweet. It's kind of Promethean shame, right? From the founders of OpenAI, very clearly kind of transferring power, agency, and the labor that goes into it to the machine itself. This kind of takes me to Matteo. The novelty of your perspective is to have a labor theory of automation, or one of the novelties. Instead of focusing on the mind, a machine analogy, the point is to focus on the intelligence of labor that's captured through these machines. So can you just kind of tell me, what does the labor theory of automation do for us? What is it?
Yes, this was probably my attempt in the book. They have the master actually reviving an old theory. It's not my theory. Yeah. That we need to see the development of technology from another point of view that is not simply the point of view of labor or capital. The labor theory of automation was the theory of automation for Adam Smith, Charles Babbage, and Karl Marx to start with. Of course, Marx took another direction, but they started from the analysis of the labor process to see how the design of the machine imitated somehow quite perfectly the design of the labor process, of the cooperation of labor after many routines and so on. We could call it labor theory of automation even today, but clearly AI is this crystallization of collective labor, collective knowledge, collective intelligence, so more of a social cooperation across the whole society. But I think AI itself in its infrastructure is a sort of demonstration of this theory of automation in which automation emerges from below, because clearly in the basic architecture of AI, you have a data set from a data center built with the data produced by our activities, could be labor activities, everyday routine, on which an algorithm upon this data extract a model to automate other kind of skills or tasks later on. So I think it's clearly that AI today is an imitation of our social cooperation, and society and AI are in a sort of symbiotic relation. AI without society will never be possible. This is part of the limitation of AI. We know that AI models need to be updated, that they suffer of model collapse. They need fresh data as in the past machine needed living labor. So it is also part of the critique to be done of the ideology of AI is the fact that no machine can be autonomous, and AI will never be autonomous, because also it's clearly the crystallization of cultural heritage history, but history continues. So this machine, they have to be updated. But anyway, the labor theory that I also wrote in the book is partial, because we need other theories, the one that you mentioned at the beginning, to integrate that. We need a value theory of automation, seeing what are the effects on the chain of valorization. And we have to study also the conflicts, the antagonists, the friction that are produced by these machines when they are introduced in different contexts. I saw you had the book of Dan McKillen here on the table, just an example of an author or scholar that just want to probably stress that point, not where machines, where AI reach a point of real conflict with society. I can continue on the labor theory of automation if there are more interest on the.
I mean, I'm interested in actually this last point on the antagonisms, the contradictions between AI and democracy and anti-fascism. Raina, your book is on AI and fascism and the new fascism. I'm wondering, first of all, how do you conceptualize the connection between AI and the new fascism, and also resistance to it?
Nothing more easy than this.
2 minutes.
Yeah, the mission of the book is manifold, and for instance, regarding fascism, it's I think so important that we do not reserve fascism, the term, for something that happened in the past, but watchful that this can happen again. And when I say this can happen again, it's also important that it might take different shapes, or that it might not be an identical repetition, and it might look slightly different and still be fascist. That is maybe the justification of why call it fascism and not the new authoritarianism or something, because we see that currently. Okay, I mean, there are many linkages between the two. And for instance, you can point out why AI technology can easily be instrumentalized by fascist politics. Roland, Meyer did important work on this. Others did important work on this. I have also for years pointed out why AI technology is a great tool if you want to discriminate on people, if you want to increase social inequalities, if you want to exploit people, if you want to kind of do all the nasty things that you can do when you make predictions about people and so on. And the mission here, and the point that we need to add to this state of debate is, in which way is the linkage between AI and fascism not only opportunistic and not only instrumental? And this is what I try to achieve by looking at the ideologies that are currently mobilizing AI. AI not as merely a technology or something that happens on computer, but AI as a political, cultural, and material constellation. And we have been talking about this here for a while. And we can see that the AI industry, so the power centers of AI, like the people doing AI, extracting profits and power positions from doing AI, that this is currently shaping a big kind of alliance with at least ultra-right or alt-right politics in the US. And the idea was that we should point out that this is not only opportunism, but it has ideological roots, or common ideological roots, between alt-right and what is underway in terms of ideas and philosophies and ethics in the AI community. But this alone would already be, and then we talk about what Peter Thiel and Sam Altman are thinking, and I previously said we should not limit it to this, and this is the complicated thing. It is a broader constellation, constellation of ideologies which runs the risk of damaging our democracies and Rechtsstaats. What is that in English? Yeah, it's a hard problem translating Rechtsstaat to English. Yeah, constitutionalism. Let's say constitutionalism. And this is the idea is that I think what is important to know is that after 10 or 15 years of the big tech industry extracting all the data and resources that you can extract in, let's say, on a democratic or more or less democratic platform. Yeah, like the data was in the beginning mostly taken from consumers or from businesses. And then there has been this kind of post-colonial constellation of the extraction of energy and resources in the past. But now we are at the point where where consumer data or data that you can acquire commercially is not enough. Basically, you have it all. You need new data sources in the AI industry. Who has data that is not yet captured and that is even well structured? Maybe you look at the educational system, at the health systems, at the states, at the administration. So the turn to the state is first of all an idea to colonize new resources of data that has not yet been harvested by that industry. Then we are now in the midst of everybody talking about when will the AI bubble burst. So it is also the financial, like financing AI and AI profits and AI power by venture capital might come to an end. So it is also of relevance to find new funding sources, and the state running or paying the AI industry to run its administration would be a comparatively secure funding source compared to venture capital that might burst at some point in the near future. So there is ample interest of the AI industry to actually not only cooperate with the state, but, and this is now the proposition, actually merge or take over the state, let's say. And Francesca Bria has pointed it out so very well that what happened in the US in the last year is that big tech companies have become the operating system of that administration. Yeah, you do not cancel tens of thousands of contracts of administrative workers without how do you want to substitute them? And they are being substituted by these processes now being run on technological platforms. Yeah, there are the big technologies by Palantir. There is Immigration OS by Palantir for the ICE. There are other Palantir products for the other government branches of the US. There is the government clouds of Amazon and of Microsoft. They have contracts worth billions of dollars. And the US American state is de-sovereignizing itself by transferring sovereignty over its administrative procedures to this industry. And at the same time, this industry knows very well that they cannot run this business the next 10 years without conflicting, for instance, with environmental standards. Yeah, the projected energy use of the industry is so vast. It will be so explosive. Like scientific estimates say that data centers need 5 to 10 times more energy. Eric Schmidt says they will need 100 times the energy of today in 2030. That is only 4 years from now. So they know very well that in the framework of the current kind of international state of affairs between democratic countries and regulation and environmental protection, they will not be able to increase their profits in the way they want to do. And so they need to turn to anti-democratic and even anti-rule of law, so anti-constitutional politics, to keep their businesses running. It is kind of the conatus, the inertia of these forms of business models that they are now at the point where they conflict with democracy and constitutionalism, and therefore need to undo with democracies and constitutionalism. And this is what we see, and this is kind of where I see that linkage.
Before we turn to the questions from the audience, is there a potential for resistance?
Sorry, I omitted that part of the question.
But it's okay if there's not. I mean, I'm open to both. But like, can you reappropriate these mediums, these tools, these technologies? Can you play with them? Can you experiment? Can you break them? Right? Can you disrupt them? Can you feed it false data? Do you have to build your own? Can you socialize them?
Sorry that I forgot actually about that part of the question, and I think it would be very interesting to have a whole round on this, because I think this is a hard job, and who am I to give the one silver bullet answer? I think critiquing this formation on different layers and with different methods of critique geared for each individual arena where you bring this critique is important, and I play only one maybe key in this whole kind of range of keys that you could play. My mission is kind of enlightenment work. Like I would say I do public Aufklärung. I don't know.
Education.
Yeah, education is a transitive verb, while Bildung and Aufklärung is something you need to do yourself. So I think it is one track, but only one track to meddle with public discourse on AI, to be a voice that criticizes or that shows people that all these ideas rest on false assumptions or on very dangerous assumptions. But this is certainly not the only strategy that we should rely on, and this is why we should make a full round and probably maybe even extend the question to more people who are not here on the stage.
Yeah, maybe I think it's important to think about different arenas of resistance, and I think the university is a central one, because as you pointed out, institutes of education have become providers of data for these companies. They are really in the kind of spotlight of their ambitions. And I don't know how much I can say about Zurich, but if I look at where I am in Zurich, which is a hub for technology companies, Palantir is there, Meta is there, they are all there. And the ETH and the University of Zurich and the other institutions are very open in embracing what they call AI on very different levels. And I think that is a struggle that we all have to fight within our institutions, within the university, for example, to really make a case against a kind of naive adoption of these technologies as supposedly tools, as supposedly solutions for problems that are not yet identified. And that is what you see. So you get a lot of money when you propose, okay, I'll do something with AI here, and now let's see what would be the problems we can solve. And it's not that we have a problem, like, for example, our website cannot be understood by the students, and now we make a better website, but rather, maybe we have a chatbot, and that can help students to navigate the website. But the idea is first to have a chatbot, and then they see, okay, what can we use it for? I won't go into more details, but these are like the dynamics now at play in institutions, and I think we all are, or many of us are part in institutions, and maybe have a say or even try to intervene and also in communication with students to raise awareness about these dynamics.
I can only echo, to be honest, what has been said already. I think we need to not just pluralize critiques, but also think of how we can pluralize our approaches to resistance as well. And I think one method can, of course, be to engage in like public Aufklärung, also regarding the discourse analysis, deconstruct the myths that are being propagated by the AGI industry and so on. But also, make visible these struggles that are already occurring of those people who are resisting the construction of data centers, for instance, in the Global South, make them more visible, talk about them, and also talk more about them than, about the AGI discourses, although I still find the sort of deconstruction of these discourses to be very essential, but this is so essential because they are so dominant. So, and then, of course, also, look at the legal tools that we have, look at the discussions that we currently have with legal theorists on how we can come up with a better legal system that is more responsive to the forms of power that is being exerted by these systems. So there's also debates going on in this area, and I think it's also very important to come up with a different sort of also different legal system that is able to respond to the correlative nature of the data injustices that occur. And is there anything else that we could imagine? I mean, also, I would also, to echo Rainer as well, I think we need to have like a huge debate about this, and bring many people into the debate, and because it's not our role here as people sitting here to have a singular homogeneous answer to that.
But yeah, I agree also. I second what has been just said. I would like to go back to what Rainer explained very well, that is the need of these companies, of the state, basically to catch up with, I think, a crisis of their economic model. And I think the issue is like what we mentioned, or we promised at the beginning. The basic question would be how you socialize a monopoly, how you re-socialize a monopoly of collective knowledge that is built basically on privatization of collective knowledge. And I think there is here a kind of crisis of the Western constitution, starting from the United States, in which you have this form of steep privatization of collective knowledge into the hands of very few companies. But still, I think what's happening right now is the fact that, as we know, that neoliberalism has never been this autonomy from the political, that's been always in need of the state. I don't repeat this because I think ordoliberalism has been studied quite intensively here, also thanks by our friends and colleague Quinn Slobodian in his books. But I think the issue is how do we resocialize? And is AI going to stay as a general infrastructure of knowledge governance or disappear? And if it will stay, probably in the future will be considered almost a state utility, will be maybe, I don't know, public data center. I think if you see the development that happened in other parts of the world, because we've been focusing, I think, on Western capitalism, if you look at the constitution of data center in China, that's also a phenomenon we should follow, because there clearly there is a sort of crystallization of a de facto state monopoly on knowledge that I'm not sure will disappear very soon. While in the West, I see a sort of balkanization of powers happening in this respect. I didn't answer the issue of resistance.
I mean, the question of how do you socialize the privatization of generalized intelligence, I think, is an open question for all of us.
Yeah, sorry to speak again, but I think after hearing this round and after also taking some time to sort my own thoughts, I think we need to mention that we do need regulation. You were pointing at the necessity to come up with a law that is adapted to the new technological capabilities. But I want to stress this really much further. Yeah, we need more, not less regulation, especially after we have all been talking about digital sovereignty here in Germany and Europe over the past few months, a concept sovereignty which has its own history of power by its own. But what I, for instance, observe is that in Germany you still have some populations that are critical of technology and in the sense that they refuse also using technology. And what I see, what I've been empirically observing, is that this cohort now sways to the idea that we should not have so many regulations because they do not want American technology, but now say we need European technology, and they buy into this false narrative that we do not have technology because we do have regulation. And one of the resistances that we should perform is really also on this level of political debate, that we counter the idea that it is because of data protection and the AI Act that we do not have an AI industry, and also that we counter the idea that it would be any form of societal benefit if we had an unregulated AI industry. In fact, can there be a worse year than 2025 for Europe to call for deregulation of AI after what we can see and observe in the US? So it just takes bringing these two pieces together to make the clear case that we need more and not less regulation, because regulation is the instrument of democratic societies to balance power imbalances, to make power imbalances manageable for the common good in a way. And so I'm pointing this out because that's important and has
Thank you. We have about 35 minutes for questions. We have only one microphone, so please raise your hands and I will try to call on you. Want to start here? Or maybe you can come up here, it's easier.
I'm here. Hi, Ulrich Plate, part of the resistance. I'm an information security consultant, and so my job is to enforce technical compliance on companies that are reluctant to comply with those. It's very easy, as an aside to Anna Mühlhoff here, if you know the technology and be able to explain it to them, because then you can tell them why they're not allowed to use it. For example, in detection and reaction on threat analysis and stuff like that, you can't use non-deterministic systems if you don't survey exactly what they're doing. So they can't use it for that, which is, they only understand that if you can explain how the technology behind it works, and then it actually works. It's not as obvious as that if you do it in like for data privacy. Of course, data protection is an argument that they would be readily compliant with as well. I'm fishing for other ideas, and that's why I'm asking you, what's on ethical aspects or the enforcement of political minimum standards, how would you go about setting this up without having this explicitly in the regulation that's already in place? It's very easy to base it all on, I don't know, NIS2 or other things. I'm working mainly with critical infrastructure providers. They have to do what they're supposed to do, but up to a certain point, just on the technological side, not the ethical aspect.
Yeah. Thank you. Did someone want?
Hi, my name is Luisa Franco Machado. I'm the executive director of Equilabs. It's a youth-led digital rights and AI justice lab, also resisting big tech. A lot of the work that we do is on advocacy, so going to panels at the UN, at the EU Commission, and talking about digital rights. And one thing that I noticed is that there has been this almost ideological capture by big tech when it comes to language that is brought to then these fora, right? So then you have, for instance, Palantir execs talking about how inclusive their data sets are. Of course, they need inclusive data sets so they can persecute migrants and Palestinians and all of that. And then you have Oracle talking about European sovereignty, while you also have Mistral AI stealing knowledge from books, but they are a French company. So what I wanted to ask is, how do you fight this ideological capture when you have these companies talking about diversity, inclusion, equity, but then this is also being captured in a way that is very negative and pervasive? Thank you.
One more in the back. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Lucas. I'm a researcher and lecturer here in Germany. I like very much what Roland said, that the university should be a space of resistance, but we are seeing in the universities this push for students and researchers and professors to use AI all the time. I have already heard that how can we justify the lack of performance and efficiency if I'm not using AI to code or to write. So in the university here in Germany, in Europe, what we can do to resist AI? Do you know any initiative in your university that can serve as an example?
Maybe we start with those three, that's okay? I mean, if I can recall, so how do you regulate without technical knowledge, in a sense? How do you resist ideological capture, and what should you do in the universities?
Shall we take a round?
I can start. Maybe I start from the last question. My university would be a bad example, because in the same way they try to convince us, or they convince also the administration to deploy more ChatGPT. They are happy to buy licenses, also in a kind of very not in a very smart way, because clearly in the future, many of these tasks, especially in the administration, will be automated maybe with these private AI models. So I don't know how positive it is. I think my university, and we discussed a few times, should be, the university, as Roland said, should be the place where critical theory, critical AI studies should be basically cultivated. And the best way is indeed to, have courses about the history and the political economy of technology, science, positioning AI in the long history of science, and give the critical background to understand this phenomenon as part of a history. And only only the university can do this. Also in terms of the history of logic, mathematics, even, semiotics, and there are limitations in AI. The limitation of AI in dealing, for instance, with poetic metaphor is a logical limit. There is a group in Italy, the Icarus group, that's been working on this, also reached the German press with their result. And clearly the understanding of poetic metaphor is very difficult for AI models. And this is incredible is kind of good news for humanities department, right? And this is a logical limit. It's not a kind of, philosophical, or interpretation we can do. This one aspect. And then the other issue is the fact that the ideological reappropriation. I think social movements have been expropriated of many kind of also keywords and ideas, that they get recuperated by different form of spectacle and capitalism spectacle. I think if we deal with private monopolies, the danger is there. So I think it's just a matter of the infrastructure, of the political composition in which we work. And clearly, if we deal with this, I would say at the moment, big US monopolies, big US company dealing with this managing AI, the risk is very big. It happens also in academia, because we can say that there have been also institute of AI studies, institute of critical AI studies has been absorbing and doing some kind of whitewashing with the theories and the language that emerge from social movement. And I'm referring to the United States in this case. And I stop here because I don't.
I think regarding the question of how to stop their taking over of our language as well, I can only point back to what has been said before. Like, we need this deconstruction of these discourses as well, and that requires collective work, I think. Also to come up with a different socio-technical imaginary. And maybe also as a second aspect that I think has not yet been mentioned, we also need greater regulation regarding their lobbying efforts. That's also, I think, because, if you talk to people who are representing civil society at the EU level, for instance, they, I once had a conversation with someone who is responsible here representing the civil society. They tell you that, they're not just sitting in a room with one representative by Google, but, with 30 representatives of different companies that are related to Google. So this is very, very concerning, I would say, to hear of someone experiencing that on a day-to-day level. That's, again, also a question of regulation, I would say. But in general as well, I think regulation is one thing, but in general, and that goes back to the question of how we can socialize these systems, how can we socialize this techno-capitalist stack? We have to come up with different ways of collective data governance. And I also think, and that goes back to the discourse analysis argument as well, we have to come up with a completely different techno-social imaginary that is detached from the capitalist, focuses or foci on efficiency, on profit maximization, and so on and so forth. And there's, of course, interesting debates currently on the left by people such as Aaron Benanav and then Evgeny Morozov, Lev Weatherby. I'm not sure if I understand the explicit counter arguments there, because I think they are somewhat as well on a similar page. But these are interesting debates that I think we should also follow. And then at the same time, we have to pose the question, of course, how do we get there politically? What are the political strategies to achieve that utopian vision or this completely different techno-social imaginary? And I mean, to get there, I think we have to somehow socialize each layer of the technological stack that we are currently depending on. And again, I think to get there, we have to somehow come up with a way of engaging in each particular struggle and in bringing together the people who are engaged in these different struggles as well. Then regarding the question of this AI push in the universities, Is this being recorded? The Q&A. Okay, so I'm not being autocritical here, but so the thing is, yes, I can, of course, I'm a witness to that too. In my own university as well, I think this is something I can say a lot, is that we don't really have the tools to push back on this, and I don't think that there's a coherently developed imaginary to go against the normalization of AI tools in the universities. And also because we don't have the sort of like the legal basics that we would need, to downgrade work that is being submitted that has obviously been written by an AI, for instance. And also, but I would also point back to Rainer's argument and what he, I think, nicely depicted as this onion model of ideologies. There's different ideologies that are somehow connected to the TESCRIL acronym, that are, however, playing a huge part on the local level and on the institutional level. And I think that's a brilliant example for what Rainer has just outlined, is that, there's this imagination that AI is somehow inherently progressive, and that's why we should use it, and that's why we should use it in a particular institution as well, in our universities, because it will, I don't know, inevitably lead to a more progressive institution. But whereas at the same time, we have various studies proving on empirical grounds that the use of AI tools is definitely not enlarging the cognitive capabilities of students. Quite the contrary. And these studies have been conducted by people who are, I would say, technophile and not known as people who are generally critical of large language models. And I'm referring to a study by the MIT, for instance, which I found very surprising in sort of like in how critical it was in this regard. So yeah, I think I'll stop here.
Yeah, in terms of possibilities and opportunities in the university, I'm still searching and I'm very unclear what is possible. I think two visions I would have or hope to have is like connecting in between disciplines, in between the humanities and the social sciences, different kinds of critical approaches, and a bit like we did here today, having a kind of historical, genealogical view of these, but having also an economical critique, having different kinds of critique in connection to each other and not isolated, but really then also having a critical mass within, for example, a faculty that can that be visible as also a counterforce to do these very prominent kind of and visible dynamics that are pushed. And also connecting on a hopefully very local level, and it's also something we're beginning to trying to do with people in journalism, in critical tech journalism, which is very strong in Switzerland. And maybe the great Palantir research by Die Republik and Adrian Fichter and others, which had a huge impact, and to get in connection with these people, with people from unions, from digital activism. I think that would be for me a starting point to form networks of exchange that get a certain kind of visibility. And I think, this evening or this afternoon, however, is already a kind of big success. I mean, so many people who are eager to formulate a critique of AI within the heart of the Humboldt-University. I think it's a hopeful sign for me.
I fully agree with this diagnosis of ideological capture, and thank you also for the engagement of your group for countering this. And I think we should have much more momentum on this. A close colleague of mine calls it even epistemic capture. That, for instance, you can even observe that the majority of publications on AI are coming from the industry itself and so on. So they and the majority of like lobbying work is vast by the AI industry. So in the political realm, in the social realm, in the scientific realm, the concepts we use in talking about AI are given by the industry. And that needs to be countered. There is this nice website product I think, of a research project, an artistic research project called betterinimagesofai.org, because depictions of AI in public debate, like visual depictions of AI, are also very ideological and hugely shaped by industry visual language. And there has been that project that we should come up with alternative ways of depicting AI. For instance, I used it as a book cover, one of their images, because they are all Creative Commons licensed. And maybe we need a similar project, such as, I don't know, alternative theories of AI.org or alternative visions of AI.org. I don't know. We need, I'm serious, we need to also enable the maybe state-funded foundational research, such as the research of philosophers or media studies people who are independent of the industry and can engage in proliferating alternative vocabulary and alternative descriptions. That is hugely important. On the second point, AI in universities, I'm not sure, but I don't only want to play the devil's advocate, but also I seriously believe that we should be more differentiated in this debate, because I do not think that it is a viable strategy to say that AI needs to be rejected in education, in science, in our work environments altogether. This sounds a little bit like technological pessimism or negativism, which is also which also has a huge tradition, particularly in Germany. And what I think is very particular about the AI debate since the release of ChatGPT, so for the last 2 years, is that this comes across as a very universal technology. Yeah, there is this one single and very simple interface through which you can do almost everything, from eradicating the spelling mistakes in my snippet of text, to summarizing a text, to getting an advice on which arguments are not sound or not, what is missing, to explain me what Socrates debated there, and then to please draft a proposal for me. Yeah, a huge range of cognitive, of different levels of cognitive outsourcing is possible through that one interface and that one seemingly innocent technology. And this is why we hugely lack differentiation concerning which exact uses of language models are detrimental to our scientific culture, to our educational culture, to our philosophy, to our thinking. Is it really a problem if I use it to eradicate or improve my grammar in my crappy English? This is definitely not the same quality level compared to when I prompt the thing to write one book chapter for me. Which you can easily also do. And there is this huge range, and we need to kind of look on that spectrum. Where is AI or large language models? Where are they? Where are the different risks? Yeah, for instance, the risks, or where is where are actually which ethical problems? There are different ethical problems along the spectrum, and what are these different ethical problems, or political or scientific and so on problems? And we need to be more specific about this. This is like, we cannot reject AI in our knowledge culture as little as we can reject computers. But also saying, now in education, everybody uses a computer. Like when I studied in the early 2000s, it was a provocation to the physics professors. I studied mathematics and physics back then, that I wanted to write my term report in LaTeX on a computer instead of handwritten. Yeah, instead of handing in a handwritten report. And that was a huge provocation. Apparently fully pointless, looking back 25 years, fully pointless. And so what is it exactly about the technology that we should reject? and how can we implement it? And I would say what we should reject is dependence on huge big tech companies that extract the knowledge and things all our students at the university do. This is actually the same argument as you would apply to, should all our students have a Gmail account? No, they shouldn't. We should not use Google Classroom or Google for Education services at universities, because that would allow them to extract the data. So dependence on big tech companies is not a no-go. Also, environmentally costly applications of AI might be an argument. So you might locally host them. In Lower Saxony, we have actually a locally hosted large language model that is free to use for all the university students and staff. So maybe we can apply a different ethical standard when it comes to the use of that model. I'm not saying that we should freely use it for anything, and I do not want to read AI slop as a term paper, and I'm getting very allergic if I get one, but it's not so easy just rejecting it outright. Yeah, that's what I want to say. We need the differentiation in the debate.
I think one difficulty of AI is that it abolishes the ability to differentiate in its outputs, right? Because everything just appears in the same format, in the same prompt, in the same system, that it's really hard to distinguish, right? If it flattens culture, right, into one kind of commensurable output. So developing those critical skills to differentiate is a difficult task, I think, and takes time and years and literacy, right? The ability to read and think. That is hard to develop when this technology is shoved down our throats all the time. A couple more questions on that note.
Hi, thanks for the panel. My name is Marlene van den Ecker. I come from the Collaborative Research Center in Jena on property. Jacob, you asked for potentials of resistance, and I'm a bit surprised that none of you mentioned that we should organize politically against these technologies, not just have a critical discourse. I'm huge on critique of ideologies, like kind of my lifetime project, and I do it daily on social media. Who knows me? I'm Leni, if anyone's here. Anyways, so there are already maybe potentials for collectivizing. For example, there's a website called Data Center Watch, and it sort of maps data center oppositions in the US and worldwide. So you can have a look on those and maybe get in touch with them. And also there are ways of disrupting the models. For example, one that's called Poison Fountain, if you want to look that up. So if you want to disrupt LLMs, you can do that technologically. My question for the panel would be, how can we do that without having an even more severe impact? For example, if models have to be retrained because of disrupting them and so on. Thanks.
Hello, Markus Strater, working for a private insurance company, and my task is to apply AI in that processes. But my question goes into a similar direction. At some point in historical fascism, violent resistance was justified. And if you say, more or less, all of you, if current AI development is anti-democratic, leads to totalitarianism, and maybe also the term singularity points in that direction, when are we at the point when more violent forms of resistance, like hacking those systems and data centers, is really justified?
Hi, my name's Walter. I study algorithmic management here at Humboldt. And my question, I suppose, is to Matteo, and I want to build on the first question here, which is a topic I think somewhat underlighted in sense of the possible latent sort of progressive aspect that also exists in AI, and not just sort of resisting the possible reactionary elements of that. And I was thinking in reference to your labor theory of value, one of the interesting results of it was one of the interesting results was the idea that it sort of sublated something that Marx himself uncritically took up, which is the distinction between mental and manual labor. And I was wondering if you had any reflections on the way that might apply to new forms of trade union alliance building, in terms of this distinction has always been used to justify hierarchies within corporations, and if AI changes that, and I suppose it refers to Anna's work on cybernetic control as well. So yeah, that would be my question.
Thank you very much. My name is Nikita Bragetsky. I'm a researcher in humanities. And since you are all also researchers in the humanities, as far as I can understand, I wanted to ask you if you can see any possibility for yourself to justify the use of LLMs, of big LLMs, for your own work on the grounds of this making your own work more impactful, more efficient. Despite seeing the negative side of this, and despite your work being about criticizing it, would you say that it's still it's still okay to use the technology to make the critique of the technology more effective? I mean, would that be a viable alternative to just saying, I will never touch this thing? Thank you.
All right, let's do another round of answers. Yeah. Anyone want to start?
I could start with the last question. It's a good question, I think. I am currently working on a new research project where we're trying to do discourse analysis on the ideological elements of certain tech right discourses with a colleague who is engaging with critical computational social sciences, where we use LLMs to try to understand the evolution of potential ideological elements that are part of the tech right discourses on social media, including platforms such as X, such as Reddit. So yes, I would certainly agree that there's a very constructive way to be working with these technologies as well. And also, of course, that would have to be done in a way that is independent from the big tech companies and the technologies that they develop. The problem, however, is, and for instance, if you try to do research on certain platforms, such as on X, for instance, is that Elon Musk, of course, I think until he took over X, the API was still accessible for researchers. And now the ethical problem and the question that we have to ask ourselves is of course, do we buy this data to understand and try to understand, on the grounds of computational social science methods, for instance, how particular ideologies evolve? And that's an ethical question that also points to a problem that I think we haven't, or we have not explicitly addressed here, is the opacity problem as well. Regarding AI as such, but also regarding the platforms, the proprietary nature of the algorithms. So I see possibilities, certainly, but then also problems that have to do with, the way that digital capitalism is organized nowadays.
Does it work? Yes. I would like to do some self-criticism again and some mea culpa for philosophers. Just to mention, to go to the issue of also labor organization and trade unions today. There was a period in which they were like, we witnessed the emergence of controversial ideas like knowledge society, information society. We thought these are like neoliberal paradigms invented by some, scholars in the US to support the development of capitalism. And then we had like also here in Europe, critical ideas about cognitive labor, informational labor, immaterial labor, cognitive capitalism. And we were all a bit, allergic to this idea because we thought, labor, our activity, our bodies are like a material thing, and knowledge somehow is expressed later. There was in our critical paradigms, in our critical philosophy, a sort of dismissal of the cognitive import of labor. And then at a certain point, we started to talk about artificial intelligence economies and all these data monopolies. And we missed completely a moment in which these apparatuses started to codify and to encode the knowledge that was expressed in our social relation, conscious and unconscious activities. So there is a moment in which I think the theory of our, critical academia missed the historical point. And we were forced to change or to study more out of an historical pressure coming from the rise of the network society, this very verticalized data center, and these monopolies, at least in the West. So this goes to the issue of what happened to knowledge in labor in the last 20, 40 years of critical thinking. And we have to remember that, for instance, trade unions, workers in the factories have been always and are today familiar with the principle of Taylorism. Taylor was somebody obsessed with knowledge extraction from the worker. And today, I think we have, clearly we see this. Think about the automation of industrial factories today. We see clearly how these robots controlled by AI models, they're basically based on the mimicry of all the gesture. We see this in German factories, but also in China, where I think the automation is accelerating. And I think it's a matter of, new literacy and organization, and clearly show how probably no labor is immune by these new forms of automation. That goes to the point how you organize this. I think AI is part of this process of atomization of the working force of the labor force that started with cybernetics. Cybernetics was like this principle, computerization is this principle of the full of atomization. And so it's a matter of how you reconstruct in this new form of collective organization beyond individual sabotage, beyond individual pollution of the data in a model. And this is the problem of solidarity, constructing of indeed collective form of organization. It's a long story, but...
Roland or Rainer, do you have any comments?
Fang du ruhig an. Okay. I really like the intervention saying that it is a surprise that we have been debating this for 2 hours and not explicitly calling for more political mobilization or organization. To me, it has actually all the time been kind of the baseline assumption that we need to do that, but maybe that is a difficult baseline assumption. So let's be more explicit. Yes, we do need to politicize this whole thing and to get politically active. And by this, I mean really a broad cross-section of our societies. But the question is where, in terms of which exact political questions can do. What does it mean to resist AI politically in Germany? Yeah, I mean, how can I resist Sam Altman? How can I resist OpenAI? By not using it. No, this is a tiny resistance because not using this is not the big damage to these people. And I think the political energy in the fight against AI or in the fight that is deeply entangled with AI is really the whole shift to the right of our politics here in Central Europe currently, because what we are seeing is a development that erodes the principle of our constitutions and of our democracies. And this is exactly in line with the interests of the AI industry also here. And this is why I think that the front line, or like when it comes to politically organizing, we need to be aware that this does not mean forming one new party a little bit more to the left of existing parties, or that can easily be sorted in the spectrum from left to right of political parties. But I think what the political fight that we need is to actually protect our constitutionality, our Rechtsstaat, and our democracy wholesale. Yeah, this is a different front line. It's not the front line between parties. It's more the front line democratic Rechtsstaat or no democratic Rechtsstaat that we are facing in the next 5 to 10 years. And we can see it in the US. And there are many initiatives already kind of starting in the wake of the first participation of AfD in one of the state governments. That might even happen this autumn. There are civil society organizations there. For instance, the excellent work of fragdenstaat.de, or what is it, .org? I don't know. Or, for instance, just to name a random thing, Verwaltung für Demokratie e.V., which are administrative practitioners now organizing around the question, how can we be more resilient against a fascistic takeover of, for instance, a certain ministry, a certain administrative unit at the communal level or at the state level. And that also means, the fascistic takeover of administrative units, for instance, after a more right-wing turn of our politics in Germany, definitely means that processes are delegated from SachbearbeiterInnen to automated systems, AI-based automated systems or Palantir services. Yeah, this is where I see these struggles against the new right as deeply entangled with the struggle against AI. And suddenly this struggle against AI is not the struggle against this kind of phantom of a, like, what is AI? Let's not make it bigger than it should be. Or let's ask the concrete question, where do we need to politically fight AI? And for me, this is in Germany, these debates, we need to safeguard our constitutionalism and not only fight against Elon Musk or something like these Silicon Valley bosses.
Yeah, well, completely agree. Just a few remarks on the question of using these kind of technologies and efficiency. So first of all, I'm hesitant to be called upon to be more efficient as an academic and a scholar. That's something I would also rather not be in a Bartlebian sense. But that's another question. I think, as Rainer said, there are uses for technologies based on machine learning and pattern recognition that I think are completely justifiable, such as automatic translation, transcription, spell checking, all these kinds of things. The point is, LLMs might not be a very efficient technology for these kind of tasks. They are like it's not built for that. I mean, although the transformer architecture originally was built for transcription and translation, they are now built as this one catches all, super intelligence, whatever technology. So there is a kind of mismatch between these models and their size and their better use cases. And also the way they are built in the commercial version is like, okay, I give now ChatGPT a text and I say, make a spell checking or correct my grammar. And what it does is it does that. And then it says, yeah, do you want me to make your argument sharper? Do you want me to have some theoretical references in there? Do you want me to expand that into an essay? That's the direction that comes that is designed to drive my engagement. So these technologies are so much embedded in this kind of platform economies of driving up engagement that for these commercial technologies, at least, it's hard to kind of entangle them from this logic. And that is, I think, a big part of the problem. And I absolutely agree, we can't isolate AI from the fascist and right-wing tendency, and we can't entangle AI from the power of platform companies and their logics of monetization and doing business.
If the data that powers AI systems comes from the labor of us all, then it's pretty obvious what we need to do. We need to go on strike. Thank you very much. It's been 2 hours. Thank you to Matteo, Pasquinelli, Anna-Verena Nosthoff, Roland, Meyer, and Rainer Mühlhoff. And thank you to all of you for coming. I really appreciate it.